Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our last presentation on our tax election. My name is Cliff Kahili. I'm the city manager, and we're going to go over some of the specifics about Proposition A and the tax rate that the council has set. And we'll show a short video, and then we'll be around to answer any questions that anybody has this evening. And as always, our staff is here to answer your questions until you run out of questions. So don't be afraid to ask us anything either during the presentation or after the presentation. So as you've heard, the city is having a tax election, and the primary focus of this election is for voters to consider keeping the current tax rate the same. This will create more money for public safety, more money for street and alley repairs, and more security of our computer infrastructure. There are going to be several opportunities to vote for the proposition. Early voting is currently underway, and it ends this Friday. And then the election day is November 2nd, and that is the same dates as the city council election. That's for city council and mayor. So one of the things that a lot of people don't understand is that the city council had to pass a budget in August, which set the course for how the city will spend tax revenues in the upcoming year. And that budget was focused on several areas that, in addition to our normal city activities, which included additional public safety personnel. It tried to address streets and alleys that are continuing to fall into disrepair. And it also addressed some concerns that we have with maintaining our computer infrastructure to protect it from hackers and infiltration. And so the city council adopted a budget based on a tax rate of 0.70862, which is the tax rate that we have currently from the last budget year. And that is based on $1,000 valuation of your home. And this tax rate will increase revenues, and this is really the primary decision for residents is voting for the proposition brings in additional revenue to the city to allow us to do the things that the council felt needed to be done in the budget. So why do we have to do this? This is the first time Mesquite's ever had an election like this. And a few years ago, the state legislature decided to put a cap on how much revenue cities could generate through property tax. And they set that cap at 3.5%. In order for a city to gain more revenue, it was the legislature's intent to let the citizens decide instead of a council setting a tax rate that was higher than what a lot of citizens would want. So this gives the citizens the voice in how these revenues are used. And so when we exceed that 3.5 cap, that's when we have a tax rate election. And so the council decided that the 0.70862 was a fair tax rate for the residents to consider. So why did the council do the budget the way they did? And it was mainly in response to surveys that the city has done over the past few years. Every other year we do a citizen survey to find out what the needs are in the community. And of those surveys, they overwhelmingly come back with a focus on public safety and streets and alleys. And one of the issues that we have is Mesquite's a growing city, and there's going to be a need for more police officers and more firefighters as we continue to add population. The concern also is that we're an aging city. We have infrastructure that's 25 to 40 years old that is not holding up like it was designed to due to a lot of factors. And so that when residents say streets and alleys are a primary concern, they're wanting those street repairs. And the council felt that this budget addressed the issues raised in these surveys. So when it comes to public safety, the current budget, or the proposed budget, includes 5 new police officers for neighborhood patrols. Currently, we have 248 sworn officer positions budgeted, or 24 sworn positions budgeted in the police department. Of those, 209 are police officers, and we have 26 officers in training, and we have 13 vacancies that we're trying to fill at this time and we're recruiting for. Typically, our patrols during the day have 12 officers, and in the deep nights and evenings, we have anywhere between 16 and 24 officers on patrol. So you can imagine, with a growing city with more calls for service, there's going to be a need to have more officers on those patrols. We also have a charter provision that says that the city must maintain one police officer for every 1.6 residents. I think I said that right. Somebody correct me if I... So in order to keep up with that charter provision, the City Council has felt they want to stay ahead of the number of officers, so we're not put in a position where we have to make significant cuts to the budget in order to obtain the minimum number of police officers. And one of the issues that we're having with recruiting officers, and just like anybody else right now, is there's a labor shortage, and we're in heavy competition with other cities to hire police officers, and we want to maintain the high standards of the officers that we hire. And currently, we are 8th out of 8 cities that we benchmark against, like Plano, Richardson, Irving, Arlington. We are 8th on that list. And we're 13th out of a list of another 24 cities. And so what we're seeing is that we're falling behind in our starting pay for police officers. And this budget does include additional pay for a starting pay for our police officers. The budget also includes an additional 10 firefighter positions to increase our response rates. Last year, we had over 19,000 calls for service for fire. That includes emergency medical treatment, and then 406 structure fires. Our goal is to respond to those within 5 minutes. And as we build more houses and expand buildings, the potential for longer response times is increasing. And so part of the staffing will address adding, we have 2 stations that are currently have 3-man engines, and the standard is to have 4-man engines. So when we have that 3-man engine responding, it has to go with another unit, so we have to double up in order to have an adequate number of firefighters on a scene. With 4-man engines in all of our stations and all of our trucks, we're able to disperse that equipment more effectively and respond to more calls independently. The funding also includes staffing for what's called a traffic attenuator. And that's basically just a big roadblock that we put out on the highway when there's a traffic accident. Currently, we are taking a $1 million piece of fire apparatus, a fire engine, and we're using that to block a traffic accident in a work zone so our firefighters and police officers can tend to people in the accident. So what this attenuator will do is it allow that piece of equipment to be ready for a response and to protect those work zones. And they'll be equipped with cones and flares and provide a safe work area. And the funding also includes additional pay for our firefighters. Again, we're finding it very difficult to hire people at the standards that we like to hire at. And we are in competition with other cities. Currently, we are 5th out of our 8 benchmark cities when it comes to starting pay for our firefighters. And then you probably drove over a couple of potholes on your way to the meeting tonight. And what's happening to our streets and our alleys is that they're aging. And they were most of the streets that we have were built at a time where we didn't have a standard for a strength of concrete that would last 50 years. And in addition to that, you have weather that impacts the condition of the roadways. So when it's hot, and a few years ago we had a drought with high heat, that contracts the soil underneath the pavement and the pavement fails. And then the other thing that impacts the streets is expansion of soil. And when it's wet, in the past 2 years, we've had exceptionally wet weather that has expanded. So with all that expansion and contraction on our roadways, our streets and alleys are just failing faster than we can maintain them. And so this current budget adds an additional $750,000 towards just fixing potholes and minor damage to roads. This doesn't include building the new roads that we're building in the community. You may recall that there was a street bond a few years ago that was to address residential streets. And those addressed about 100 miles of our worst streets. The funding that we're talking about is to address the streets that are not quite that bad, but we want to try to catch them before they get into that worst condition. And so we're trying to do our best to stay ahead and keep our roads in a condition where you have 1 or 2 potholes here and there as streets fail instead of 40 or 50 over a stretch of a roadway. And it's the same thing for alleys. We have numerous homes with rear access with alleys, and the alleys are behaving the same way, and it makes it very difficult for us to pick up trash and for residents to make it to their driveways with all the alley potholes and failures. And the one thing a lot of people don't understand is our cybersecurity funding. And we have a lot of personal information on residents when it comes to their water bills, the bank account information that goes with those. We have permits that have a lot of information. There's a lot of things that we have on our residents. Plus, you've seen in the news that several cities have been attacked by hackers where they've shut down the network and completely kept cities from being able to operate. And we have an IT department that's well-staffed and very attuned to these issues, but the attacks are becoming more sophisticated and more frequent. And so what this funding will allow for is a company to monitor our networks for intrusions 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it'll also include a staff member to monitor that contract and work to make our systems more secure. And it's a vital component, because the last thing we need is to shut down and not be able to operate our water pumps or our sewer treatment facilities. A lot of questions come to, well, what's the impact to the residents with this tax rate? And the council was very concerned with what that impact would be and how much residents would be willing to pay for these additional services like streets and public safety. Sorry about that noise. So council felt that keeping the tax rate at the same level as the past budget year, the estimated impact on an average resident is about $10 a month, or about $120 a year. And so we know the cost of services are going up, and a lot of people have additional costs, but the city has those costs as well. And the proposal was to make sure that we didn't impact the residents too significantly with this tax rate. And so if the tax rate doesn't pass, and what we would do is the city would go down to the the capped level, which is a 3.5% increase on revenues, which would lower the tax rate to 0.6656. And so the real difference here is that the city will generate an additional $3.9 million in revenue. And to put that in perspective, we have a $220 million budget. And so what we're asking the residents with this measure is, are you willing to pay a little bit more taxes, which would get us about $3.9 million in additional revenue. So what we have is a quick video that kind of recaps some of the information that I've provided, and after that we'll be happy to answer any questions. So y'all watch the video now.
City of Mesquite tax election. In recent community surveys, Mesquite residents expressed that public safety, streets, and infrastructure were their top priorities. 66% of citizens stated maintenance of city streets was a very high priority. 62% of citizens stated quality police and fire services was a high priority. Public safety and street maintenance were ranked by citizens as the biggest issues Mesquite will face in the next 5 years. Overview of the tax election. The Mesquite City Council unanimously approved the fiscal year 2021-2022 budget, which keeps the city property tax rate the same as last year. The City of Mesquite's new budget includes additions for public safety, city streets, and cybersecurity. Additions include 15 new police and fire positions, more funding for street and alley maintenance, and better protection of electronic data. While the property tax rate will remain the same as last year, because of increased property values, the city will see increased revenues. This is how the city proposes to pay for these additional services. State law requires that Mesquite voters approve this year's tax rate, which exceeds the 3.5% voter approval tax rate. Proposition A. Approving the ad valorem tax rate of 0.70862 per $100 valuation in the City of Mesquite, Texas for the current year, a rate that is 0.04302 higher per $100 valuation than the voter approval tax rate of the City of Mesquite, Texas, for the purpose of increasing fire and police staffing levels and competitive pay for fire and police personnel, and increasing funding for alley and street maintenance. Last year, the ad valorem tax rate in the City of Mesquite, Texas was 0.70862 per $100 valuation. Proposition A will be on the November ballot for Mesquite voters to vote for or against the proposition. Early voting, October 18th through the 29th. Election Day, November 2nd. If Proposition A is approved by voters, how might this election impact residents and individuals over 65 years of age? If Proposition A is approved by voters, the average homeowner would pay about $10 more per month in city taxes based on the average property value in Mesquite. The tax rate would not impact property owners who have qualified for the age 65 or older homestead exemption with their property appraiser. How will the revenue generated from Proposition A be allocated? Proposition A will provide revenue for the approved budget. It allocates funds for 5 additional Mesquite police officer positions to increase neighborhood patrols, plus competitive pay increases for officers that serve the community. 10 additional Mesquite Fire Department positions, which will provide faster response times and increase public safety. $750,000 in additional funding for city streets and alley repairs, and funding to improve security from cyber attacks on city computers that have sensitive data and access to operations, as well as the public's personal information. For information on the tax election, voting dates, voting locations, and more, please visit cityofmesquite.com/2021 tax election.
Before we get to questions, just some of the other questions that we have received from residents as we've introduced this is, what else is included in the budget? And this year in the budget, we have a health scan program for our firefighter cancer prevention program. We have allocated funds out of other funds besides our general fund for a safety area around the AMC Theater and those restaurants to add additional patrols there. There is a new SRO for the Vanguard High School. There are in competitive pay for some of our lower wage positions. I keep going back to the labor shortage and the competition for staffing, and we're having to look at our pay rates for all employees because of the competitive nature for people with certain licenses and experience. Just as a reminder, these are the dates for voting, and we have a special website that has a lot more of the frequently asked questions. If you think of something after you leave tonight, or we're not able to answer. And at this time, I'm happy to answer any questions, and if I can do anything to help you out, since most of the people here are staff, so if you don't want to ask questions, yeah. If you don't have any questions now, we'll be happy to answer them after the program.
I would like to ask a question. Are you saying not only are we getting 5 more police officers, they will be starting at a higher rate? Are you saying that the officers are going to get a raise across the board?
Yes, ma'am. It will increase pay. Based on how our pay levels are, an increase in starting pay increases the pay for all fire and police staffing. Yes, ma'am.
They're having a very large, I guess you'd call it, where companies go to interview a job fair just for law enforcement and first responders down at the Love Field at the Museum of Flight. Are y'all participating in that?
I'm not aware if we are. A lot of the job fairs that are being put on by cities are specifically focused on those cities.
Okay.
And so they don't want the competition from what I would say is probably some of the top fire and police departments in the country.
Okay, thank you.
As far as the taxes, you're talking about those of us that are over 65.
No.
Hush. That is not going to impact us at all as far as our city taxes are concerned?
If you qualify for the property tax freeze for people over 65, then your values are frozen at whatever year you turn 65.
What
And
are you talking about if you qualify?
if you're 65 and over and have notified the Dallas
Notified
Central,
the county when
yeah. So yes, so
years ago, when I was over 65.
so the taxes are frozen, or your values are frozen at whatever rate they were then, unless you make significant improvements to your home and all of that. So, and it's a large number of to meet those improvements. And so, yes, the value is frozen. So residents will not experience any increased payments on their taxes.
Because if it's with the county, it's with the city also.
Yes, ma'am. They handle the valuations and the certification for that. So, well, at this time, I'm going to thank y'all for being here. And if you have any additional questions, feel free to visit our website, and all of our contact information is on there. And anybody who's watching remotely on Facebook Live, feel free to contact the city manager's office if you have any questions, and we're happy to make sure that everybody understands all of the aspects of the tax election. Thank you for your time tonight.